He built a $1 million empire while she sold furniture to survive. When he found his mother crying on a doorstep, holding an empty bowl, begging strangers for food, her truth destroyed everything he thought success meant. The October rain blurred the windshield of the black Porsche as David Monroe pulled onto Maple Street. 6 years. It had been 6 long years since he'd driven down this narrow road, lined with modest houses and chain-link fences. 6 years building his empire in Manhattan. 6 years climbing from broke college dropout to self-made millionaire. 6 years of 14-hour days, ruthless negotiations, and sacrifices that seemed worth it at the time. He hadn't visited, not once. The thought jabbed at him, but he pushed it aside like he pushed aside everything uncomfortable. He'd sent money, hadn't he? $500 every month like clockwork. More than enough for his mother to live comfortably in this small Ohio town, where a decent house cost less than his monthly parking spot. Besides, he was here now. Surprise visit. He'd brought gifts, expensive ones, a cashmere coat from Milan, French perfume, a new tablet because she'd complained once about her old phone being too small to read on. The GPS announced his arrival. David slowed the car, squinting through the rain at the familiar houses. Mrs. Patterson's blue colonial, the Henderson's ranch with the perpetually broken fence, and there, third house on the right, his childhood home. The 2-story yellow house with white shutters, now looking smaller and shabbier than he remembered. He was reaching for his phone to call his mother when he saw her. David's foot slammed on the brake. His mother, Margaret Monroe, stood on the neighbor's front porch. Her thin frame was wrapped in a faded green cardigan he'd seen in photos from 5 years ago. Grey hair pulled back in a messy bun. And she was holding something, a bowl, a simple ceramic bowl with what looked like soup inside. She was crying, not quiet tears. Her whole body shook with sobs, shoulders hunched, one hand pressed against her mouth as if trying to hold back sounds of anguish. And in front of her stood another woman, younger, maybe in her 40s, brown hair tied back, worn jeans and a faded sweatshirt. She had one hand extended toward Margaret, her expression caught between compassion and profound discomfort. David sat frozen in the driver's seat, rain drumming against the roof, watching a scene that made no sense. His mother, the proudest woman he'd ever known, the woman who'd rather work 3 jobs than accept charity, was on a stranger's porch, crying, holding a bowl of food like, no, 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 no. The word escaped his lips, quiet and horrified, but the scene didn't change, didn't disappear. It was real. David fumbled with the door handle, nearly falling out of the car in his hurry. His Italian leather shoes hit a puddle. He didn't care. He ran. "Mom!" The shout tore through the quiet street. A dog started barking somewhere. A curtain twitched in a window. Margaret turned, eyes wide with shock. When she saw him, really saw him, something broke across her face, pure terror. "David!" Her voice was barely a whisper. "David, you shouldn't be here." He reached the porch in seconds, breathing hard, completely lost. His eyes moved from his mother's tear-stained face to the neighbor, to the bowl trembling in his mother's hands. "What is this?" "Mom, what's happening?" Margaret pulled the bowl closer to her chest, as if it were a shield. The tears kept falling, silent now, but constant. The neighbor stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm. "David, I'm Claire. I live next door. I think you two need to talk." "Talk about what?" His voice came out harsher than he intended. "Why is my mother standing on your porch crying with—" He couldn't finish the sentence. The implications were too terrible. "No!" Margaret's voice cracked. It's not what you think." "Then explain it to me." David moved closer, instinctively reaching for her shoulders, but stopping himself, afraid she might break under his touch. She looked so frail. When had she become so thin? "Please, Mom." "Explain what I'm looking at." Margaret's mouth opened, closed, her whole body trembled. Claire spoke quietly. "Mrs. Monroe, you don't have to—" "I do. Margaret cut her off, eyes locked on her son. In that gaze, David saw shame, love, exhaustion, and something else. Relief, maybe. I need to tell him. She took a shaky breath. Then another. Finally, she spoke. I wasn't asking for food, David. He blinked, confused. Then what? I was returning it. Each word seemed to cost her everything. Returning the bowl, returning the kindness, returning the generosity I didn't deserve but needed so desperately. Her voice broke completely. Margaret held the bowl out to Claire, who took it with infinite gentleness. David stared, his brain refusing to process. Returning? Mom, I don't understand. Claire has been bringing me food for 3 months. The words rushed out now, a dam finally breaking. Twice a week, sometimes 3 times. Soup, casseroles, fresh bread, fruit. All done quietly, secretly, because she knew because I couldn't. Couldn't what? David's voice dropped to a whisper, dread pooling in his stomach. Margaret looked directly at him, and in that moment he saw everything he'd missed. The weight she'd lost, the deep circles under her eyes, the way her hands shook, not just from emotion but from genuine weakness. I couldn't eat properly, son, because the money you sent every month, it wasn't enough, not nearly enough. The world tilted. Rain fell. A car passed, splashing through puddles. Somewhere a door closed. But for David, everything had stopped with those words. What do you mean, not enough? Claire stepped forward gently. David, your mother got sick 4 months ago. Heart problems. She needed expensive medications, specialist appointments every week, dietary changes that meant buying fresh food she couldn't afford, and she lost her job at the diner because she couldn't stand for 8-hour shifts anymore. Each word was a knife. But David looked at his mother, then at Claire, then back again. But I sent $500 every month. It should have been fine. Margaret's voice was flat now, drained. If I'd been healthy, if I'd still had my job, if I hadn't needed medications that cost $300 a month, if I hadn't had to choose between eating or healing. Why didn't you tell me? The shout burst out of him. Why didn't you call? The silence that followed was deafening. Then Margaret pulled out her phone. The screen was cracked on one corner. She unlocked it with shaking hands and held it out to him. Look at the call history. David took the phone, scrolled through. Mom, July 15th, 2:15 p.m., 52 seconds, Mom. July 18th, 9:30 a.m., 1 minute 8 seconds, Mom. July 23rd, 6:45 p.m., 41 seconds, Mom. August 2nd, 11:20 a.m., 1 minute 15 seconds, Mom. August 10th, 8:15 p.m., 38 seconds. The list went on, dozens of calls, all under 2 minutes. Check the messages too, Margaret said quietly. He switched to the text thread, read with growing horror. July 15th. Mom, hi honey, do you have a minute? I need to discuss something important. David, hey Mom, super busy closing a big deal but all good. Talk soon. July 18th. Mom, David, can you please call when you get a chance? It's about my health. David, is it an emergency? I'm in meetings all day. If urgent, call 911. July 23rd. Mom, son, I really need to talk to you. It's serious. David, Mom, flying to LA tonight. Can it wait till weekend? Love you. August 2nd. Mom, please David, just 10 minutes. David, Mom, in the middle of investor presentations. Catch up next week. August 10th. Mom, it's okay, don't worry about it. Talk whenever you have time. David, thanks for understanding. You're the best. David read each exchange, then reread them. Horror growing with every super busy and talk soon and catch up next week. She'd tried. God, she'd tried so many times, and he'd been too busy building his empire to notice his mother was falling apart. I stopped trying in August, Margaret explained, her voice small. I realized you were happy there, living your dreams, closing deals, flying around the country. How could I call crying about needing money for food? What kind of mother would that make me? You're not... David's voice broke. You're the best mother anyone could have. You worked 2 jobs to send me to college. You never once complained when I quit school to start my company. You believed in me when no one else did. His voice failed completely. David dropped to his knees right there on Claire's porch, rain soaking through his $1,000 suit, the phone slipping from his hands. "You should have told me, and you should have asked." Margaret's words weren't angry. They were just true. "When was the last time you asked how I really was? Not 'how are you, Mom?' while distracted by your phone, but really asked about my health, my bills, my life." Silence. Because she was right. When had he last had a real conversation with her? Not a rushed call while walking between meetings, not a quick text between flights. An actual conversation where he listened, truly listened, to her answers. "So I started selling things," Margaret continued, each word heavy with resignation. "The microwave you bought me, the coffee maker, the television. Whatever I could sell to buy groceries and medicine. You sold the things I gave you?" David felt like he'd been punched. "What choice did I have?" "You could have what?" For the first time, anger flickered in Margaret's voice. "Could have starved. Could have stopped taking heart medication and hoped for the best. Could have kept calling my son who was too busy being successful to answer." The words hit like physical blows. Claire, who'd been standing silently by, finally spoke. "The neighborhood started helping about 2 months ago. I was the first. Noticed Mrs. Monroe had lost dangerous amounts of weight. Started bringing extra food when I made dinner. Others joined in. Bob from the hardware store, the Martinez family, Linda from the library. We all just wanted to help." David lifted his head, tears mixing with rain on his face. The neighborhood helped. Strangers helped. And I, her own son. "You're not a stranger." Margaret knelt down beside him, ignoring the pain in her knees. She took his face in her worn hands. "You're my son, and you got lost. That's all. You got lost in the bright lights and big numbers, but you're here now, finally here. And maybe," her voice softened, "maybe that's enough." David wrapped his arms around his mother and sobbed. Not the quiet tears of a composed CEO. The raw, broken sobs of a son who'd failed the person who gave him everything. They stayed like that on Claire's porch. 2 people kneeling in the rain, holding each other, while a neighbor watched with quiet tears of her own. Because sometimes people don't realize they're drowning until they've already gone under. And sometimes, just sometimes, they get pulled back to shore just in time. But the damage has been done. And healing would take more than money. It would take presence, time. Genuine change. David was about to learn the hardest lesson of his life. Success means nothing if you lose yourself and the people who matter most in the process of achieving it. David helped his mother stand from the wet porch. Her knees cracked, a sound that pierced straight through him. When had she become so fragile? How had he missed the signs? Claire supported Margaret's other arm, steadying her with the practiced care of someone who'd done this many times before. "Let's get you both inside," Claire said gently. "The rain's getting heavier." They walked slowly toward the yellow house. David noticed things he'd somehow overlooked in his shock. The peeling paint on the front door. The broken doorbell with yellowed tape covering it. The gutter hanging loose on one side. The small front garden overgrown with weeds. How long had it looked like this? How long had he been blind? Margaret fumbled with her keys, hands trembling too much to fit the key into the lock. Not just from cold or emotion, David realized with growing horror, from genuine weakness. "Let me, Mom." She didn't protest. Just handed him the key and leaned against Claire, breathing harder than she should from such a short walk. David opened the door, and the smell hit him immediately. Mustiness. Damp. Something sweet and sickly that spoke of old water damage. The house that always smelled like his mother's lavender soap and fresh cookies now smelled like abandonment. They stepped into the living room. David flipped the light switch and had to physically steady himself against the doorframe. The room was nearly empty. Where was the comfortable sofa where they'd watched movies together? Where was the bookshelf full of photos and his mother's collection of ceramic figurines? Where was the coffee table with the crocheted runner she'd made herself? Gone. All of it. 2 folding chairs sat against the wall. A small TV, ancient with a thick back, perched on a cardboard box. That was it. The hardwood floor showed lighter rectangles where furniture had once stood. "Mom," his voice came out strangled. "Where's everything?" Margaret didn't answer. She walked carefully to one of the folding chairs and sat with a sigh that sounded like pain. Claire, still in the doorway, spoke quietly. "She sold it, David, piece by piece, to pay for medication and food." The words didn't seem real. David walked through the living room like a ghost, touching the empty spaces. The sofa had been here, the one she'd saved for 6 months to buy when he was in high school. The bookshelf, handmade by his late grandfather, had stood against that wall. He moved toward the kitchen, almost afraid of what he'd find. The small kitchen looked worse. The overhead light flickered twice before staying on, casting a weak yellow glow over everything. The refrigerator was tiny, old, making a grinding noise that suggested it was barely hanging on. David opened it with hands that shook. Inside, 1/2 gallon of milk, 4 eggs, a small container of butter, 2 apples, slightly bruised, a plastic container with what looked like soup, probably from Claire. That was all. An entire refrigerator, and that was all the food in it. David opened the cabinets, half-empty jars of generic peanut butter, a box of store-brand crackers, 2 cans of soup, salt, sugar in a jar that was nearly empty, instant coffee. His mother had always hated instant coffee, said it tasted like disappointment. He gripped the counter, head spinning. The tile was cracked beneath his hands. The faucet dripped steadily into the stained sink. Black mold grew in the corners where the counter met the wall. "David," his mother's voice called from the living room, weak. "Come sit down, honey, please." He walked back on autopilot, pulled the other folding chair close to hers and sat, unable to meet her eyes. Claire remained standing near the door, present but giving them space. Margaret looked at her son, really looked at him. "You want to know everything, don't you?" He nodded, throat too tight for words. "Then I'll tell you, all of it." She took a breath, gathering strength. "It started in June. I was working the evening shift at Rosie's Diner. You remember that place, where I've been waitressing for 12 years. David nodded. "I felt this pain, right here." She pressed her hand to her chest, like an elephant sitting on me, couldn't breathe, broke out in a cold sweat. Thought maybe it was just exhaustion, but it didn't stop. David's hands clenched into fists. June, 4 months ago, he'd been in California, celebrating closing a $2 million deal. "Claire found me collapsed in my yard," Margaret continued. "Called an ambulance. They took me to County General. I check on her every day," Claire added softly. "Had been for weeks because I noticed she wasn't looking well. Found her on the ground by her tomato plants." "They ran tests," Margaret said, voice flat as if she'd rehearsed this story in her head 1,000 times. "Heart arrhythmia, dangerously high blood pressure. The doctor said I needed medication immediately. Expensive medication. Plus weekly checkups with a cardiologist. Plus a complete diet overhaul. No sodium, lean proteins, fresh vegetables, fruits." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Fresh vegetables, David? Do you know what fresh produce costs when you have $70 left after paying bills?" $70, David whispered. "After rent, utilities, phone, internet. That internet you insisted I needed to stay connected, and the medications. That's what was left from your $500. Margaret's voice cracked. "I tried to make it stretch. I really did. Bought the cheapest chicken, the kind that's mostly water, rice and beans in bulk, eggs when they were on sale. But it wasn't enough. It just wasn't enough." "Why didn't you tell me?" The question came out anguished. "Why didn't you call me that day from the hospital?" The silence was heavy enough to crush. Margaret picked up her phone from beside the chair, unlocked it with the cracked screen facing him, went to her text messages. "Read them again. Read them and tell me when I could have told you." David took the phone, forced himself to read every message he'd sent. June 16th, Mom. "David, I was in the hospital today. They said my heart. David, Mom, are you okay? I'm boarding a plane to SF. Is it an emergency? Mom, I'm home now. Not an emergency, but we need to. David, thank God. I'll call you after I land. Love you. He never called after landing. June 20th. Mom, son, do you have time this week to discuss my medical situation? David, swamped with meetings. Mom, everything okay though? Not getting worse. Mom, not worse, but I need to talk about the costs. David, if you need more for co-pays, just let me know. Gotta run, big presentation. June 28th. Mom, David, please. I'm struggling with the medication costs. Can we talk about... David, Mom, sending you extra $200 this month, that should help. Super busy, but thinking of you. $200. He'd sent $200 like it was a gift when she'd been trying to tell him she needed help. July 10th. Mom, the extra money helped, but I lost my job at the diner. Can't stand for long shifts anymore. David, that's awful, Mom, but maybe it's a blessing. You should rest more anyway. Talk soon, rest. He told her to rest, as if resting paid bills. July 25th. Mom, David, I'm scared. I had to sell the sofa to buy this month's medication. I don't know what to... David, Mom, you didn't have to do that. I'll send more money. $100 extra, okay? $100 for a sofa she'd saved 6 months to buy. August 3rd. Mom, I need help. Real help. Can you come home, just for a weekend? David, Mom, August is crazy for me. 3 investor meetings and a keynote speech. September, I promise. September. He'd promised September. August 20th. Mom, it's okay. Don't worry about me. You focus on your important work. David, you're the best. Knew you'd understand. David read each message 3 times. Each super busy. Each talk soon. Each promise he'd never kept. Each dismissal of her attempts to reach out. She'd tried over and over. And he'd been too self-absorbed, too focused on his important work to see the desperate undertone in every message. I stopped trying in August, Margaret said, taking her phone back. Realized you had your life, your success, your dreams finally coming true. How could I call crying about selling furniture for food? What kind of burden would that make me? You're not a burden! The shout burst from David, then he controlled himself. Sorry, I'm sorry, Mom. You're not a burden. You've never been a burden. But I felt like one. Her voice was so small now. Felt like some needy old woman clinging to her successful son. Better to handle it myself, I thought. Better to let you live your life. So you started selling everything. What choice did I have? Margaret gestured at the empty room. Couldn't work. Your money didn't cover expenses. So yes, I sold what I could sell. How much did you get for the sofa? David almost didn't want to know. Claire answered when Margaret couldn't. $80. The used furniture place said that's all they could offer for something that old. $80. For a sofa that cost $1,500. That his mother had saved for 6 months to buy, that she'd sat on every evening, reading or watching TV, proud of this small luxury she'd earned. $80. The bookshelf brought $50, Claire continued, voice sad. Your grandfather made that, she told me. But she needed to eat. The new microwave you bought her for Christmas, $30 at a pawn shop. The coffee maker, $20. The television you sent last year, $150. David put his head in his hands. $4,000 worth of gifts and necessities, sold for maybe $400 total. Barely enough to cover 1 month of medication. And even that wasn't enough, Margaret said. Because medications are monthly. Food is daily. The little money I got from selling things ran out fast. That's when the neighborhood started helping, Claire said. I was bringing in my mail one evening and saw Mrs. Monroe sitting on her front step, just sitting there, looking at an empty dinner plate like she didn't know what to do with it. And I knew. Knew what? David asked. That she hadn't eaten that day. Maybe not the day before either. Claire's voice thickened with emotion. So I went inside, made an extra large pot of soup and brought it over. Told her I'd made too much and didn't want it to go to waste. She tried to refuse, of course, too proud, but I could see the hunger in her eyes. Margaret looked down at her hands, tears falling silently. I started bringing food regularly, Claire continued. Then others noticed. Bob from the hardware store. Turns out your mum fixed his son's pants for a job interview years ago, wouldn't accept payment. He started leaving groceries on her doorstep. The Martinez family, whose daughter your mother tutored in English for free, they'd bring tamales and rice. Linda from the library brought bread and fruit. David listened, each word a fresh wound. Strangers had shown more care than he had. Neighbors with so little themselves had given what they could, while he, a millionaire, had sent $500 and called it enough. We all did it quietly, Claire said. Knew she wouldn't accept if it felt like charity, so we'd say we made too much, or it was leftovers, or we were cleaning out our pantry. Small lies to preserve her dignity. And today, David looked at his mother. Today you were returning the bowl? Margaret nodded. Claire always left food on my doorstep and disappeared before I could answer, to spare me embarrassment. But today I needed to thank her, to let her know I saw what she was doing, that I understood, that I was grateful. You were crying because you were grateful, David understood finally. I was crying because a single mother, working 2 jobs, who can barely afford her own groceries, still found a way to feed me. I was crying because strangers showed me more kindness than I thought existed in the world. I was crying because... Her voice broke. Because my own son was living in luxury while I was choosing between heart medication and dinner. The truth sat between them, raw and devastating. David knelt in front of his mother's chair, took her thin hands in his. I'm sorry. God, Mom, I'm so sorry. I was so focused on building my company, on being successful, on proving I'd made it. I forgot what actually mattered. And what matters? Margaret asked softly. You, being here, being present, not just sending money and thinking that's enough. He looked up at her through tears. I almost lost you, didn't I? If Claire hadn't helped, if the neighbors hadn't stepped up. Don't think about that now. How can I not think about it? David's voice rose. I have millions in the bank, Mom. Millions. I live in a penthouse. I drive a Porsche. I eat at restaurants that cost more per meal than you had for a month. And you were here selling your grandfather's bookshelf for $50 to buy food. The weight of his failure pressed down on him, suffocating. Tomorrow, he said, voice firm with new determination. We're going to the best cardiologist in the state. I don't care what it costs. We're filling this kitchen with good food. We're replacing every piece of furniture. We're fixing this house top to bottom. David, you don't need to... Yes, I do. He squeezed her hands gently. But more than that, I'm staying. Not going back to New York. I'll work from here. I'll be here, Mum. Actually present, because sending money means nothing if I'm not around to see if you're okay. Margaret searched his face. You can't just leave your life in Manhattan. That wasn't life. It was just existence with a nice address. David stood, pulling her into a careful hug. This is life. Right here. With you. They held each other in that nearly empty room while Claire watched, wiping her own tears. Because sometimes it takes losing everything to realize what you actually have. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you get a second chance to make it right. David had nearly lost that chance. But he was here now, finally, truly here, and he would never leave again. David didn't sleep that night. He lay on the bare floor of his old childhood bedroom. The bed had been sold months ago, staring at water stains on the ceiling he'd never noticed before. Every creak of the house, every labored breath he heard from his mother's room down the hall, every sound reminded him of how close he'd come to losing her. At 5 in the morning, he gave up trying to rest. He got up, put on yesterday's wrinkled clothes, and went to the kitchen. Margaret was already there. Sitting in one of the folding chairs, drinking instant coffee from a chipped mug with a faded "World's Best Mom" printed on it, a Mother's Day gift from when he was 8. She looked up as he entered, surprise crossing her weathered face. You're up early. Couldn't sleep. David pulled the other chair close to hers. Mom, We're going shopping today. Real shopping. Grocery store, furniture store, everything. And I'm not taking no for an answer." Margaret opened her mouth to protest. He could see the reflexive pride rising in her eyes, but then she just sighed and nodded. "Okay, son." The surrender in her voice broke something else inside him. How many battles had she fought alone before reaching this point of exhausted acceptance? They drank terrible coffee in comfortable silence as dawn broke over Maple Street. Then Margaret went to get ready, moving slowly toward the bathroom. David heard the shower turn on, then sputter and go cold. Heard his mother's small gasp of frustration through the thin walls. The water heater was broken too. He added it to the growing list in his mind of things that needed fixing. Things he would have known about if he'd ever bothered to actually visit, instead of just wiring money and assuming everything was fine. An hour later, they were in the Porsche heading to the grocery store. Margaret sat stiffly in the leather passenger seat, hands folded in her lap, looking out the window like she was seeing the town for the first time in months. Maybe she was. David wondered when the last time was she'd left the house for anything other than a medical appointment or desperate trip to the pawn shop. The supermarket parking lot was already filling up with Saturday morning shoppers. David found a spot close to the entrance, noting how his mother gripped the door handle, steadying herself before stepping out. Inside the store, the fluorescent lights seemed too bright. Cheerful music played overhead. People pushed carts full of food, selecting items without thought, without calculating every penny. Margaret stood frozen at the entrance, overwhelmed. David grabbed a shopping cart. "Come on, Mom. We're getting everything you need, everything you've been denying yourself." They started in the produce section. Margaret's hands trembled as she touched a perfect red apple, checking the price tag out of habit. "Don't look at the prices," David said gently. "Just get what you want." "David, we don't need to." "Yes, we do." He started filling the cart himself. Fresh apples, oranges, bananas, grapes, the expensive green ones she used to love, strawberries, blueberries. Vegetables of every color, crisp lettuce, ripe tomatoes, bright bell peppers, fresh broccoli, carrots, spinach. Margaret watched with tears building in her eyes as the cart filled with things she hadn't been able to afford in months. They moved through the aisles. Real coffee, not instant. Fresh bread from the bakery. Chicken breast, not the cheap, waterlogged kind. Fresh salmon, lean beef. Eggs, milk, cheese, yogurt. Everything for the heart-healthy diet her doctor prescribed, but she couldn't afford. In the cleaning supplies aisle, David noticed Margaret reach for the cheapest toilet paper. The thin, rough kind that basically felt like sandpaper. He gently took it from her hands and grabbed the premium package. "You deserve better than this, Mom." "It's just toilet paper," she protested weakly. "No, it's not." He looked at her seriously. "It's about dignity, about comfort, about not having to sacrifice basic quality of life because your son was too wrapped up in his own success to notice." Margaret's eyes filled with fresh tears. They needed 2 carts by the time they finished. The checkout line was long, and David noticed other shoppers glancing at their overflowing carts, then at his mother's thin frame and worn clothing. Some looked away quickly, embarrassed. Others smiled with understanding. The total came to over $400. The cashier raised her eyebrows slightly. Margaret paled. "David, this is too much." He handed over his credit card without hesitation. "It's not even close to enough." They loaded the bags into the car. Margaret was quiet during the drive home, fingers twisting in her lap. "What are you thinking?" David asked. "I'm thinking, when was the last time I had a full refrigerator? When was the last time I didn't have to calculate every purchase, didn't have to put things back because I couldn't afford them?" She turned to him. 2 years, David. It's been 2 years since I felt this kind of relief." The knife twisted deeper. 2 years she'd been struggling, and he'd had no idea. Back at the house, they spent an hour putting everything away. The tiny refrigerator was packed full. They'd need a new one soon, David noted. The cabinets looked less depressing with actual food in them. Margaret stood in the kitchen looking at the stocked shelves with an expression of wonder mixed with grief. "All this time," she whispered, "I just needed my son to see me." David wrapped his arms around her. "I see you now, Mom. I promise. I see you." That afternoon, while Margaret rested, the morning had exhausted her, David went for a walk around the neighborhood. The street looked different in daylight. Modest houses with chain-link fences, kids riding bikes, an old man watering his lawn, normal working-class America, the world he'd come from and somehow forgotten in his rush to the top. He saw a woman putting groceries in her car, Claire. She spotted him and waved. "David, how's your mother doing?" "Better. We went shopping this morning, filled the kitchen." He walked over to her. "Claire, I don't know how to thank you for everything you did." "You don't need to thank me." She closed her trunk. "Your mother would have done the same for anyone. She's that kind of person." "What do you mean?" Claire leaned against her car, crossing her arms. "You don't know, do you? All the things she did for people around here." David shook his head slowly. 5 years ago, my son got sick, really sick. Pneumonia. I'm a single mom, worked 2 jobs, and I couldn't afford to take time off. Your mother showed up at my door every day for 2 weeks, brought soup, sat with him while I worked, read him stories, refused payment. Claire's voice thickened. "She saved us." David listened, stunned. The Martinez family, their daughter was struggling in school, about to drop out. Your mom tutored her every evening for a year, for free. That girl graduated, went to community college, has a good job now. I didn't know any of this. Bob from the hardware store? His wife left him with 3 kids. He was falling apart. Your mother cooked meals for those kids twice a week for 6 months. Helped with homework, mended their clothes, just showed up and helped. Each story landed like a revelation. His mother, struggling herself, had been the neighborhood's quiet angel. "So when she needed help," Claire continued, "when we realized she was suffering alone, we didn't even hesitate. This whole street owes her kindness we can never fully repay." David had to sit down on the curb. "I thought I was successful, thought I'd made it, built a company worth millions. But I didn't even know my own mother was a hero to an entire neighborhood." Claire sat beside him. "Success isn't what you build. It's who you become. And judging by what she created in you before you lost your way, I think you have a chance to become someone worth knowing again. You think I lost my way? I think you forgot where you came from. Forgot that wealth isn't just money, it's community, connection, caring." She stood, brushing off her jeans. "But you're here now. That's something." "I'm staying," David said firmly. "Not just visiting, staying." Claire studied his face, then smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "Then welcome home, David. Welcome back to Maple Street." She walked away, leaving David sitting on the curb of his childhood street, surrounded by modest homes and ordinary people who had more wealth in their hearts than he'd ever had in his bank account. That evening, David heard a knock at the door. He opened it to find an older man standing there, maybe 70, with weathered hands and kind eyes. "Help you?" David asked. "You must be Margaret's boy." "David, right? I'm Bob. Run the hardware store on 5th. The one who helped my mother." Bob shifted uncomfortably. "She told you. Didn't want her to know it was deliberate. Tried to be subtle about it." "Everyone was subtle about it," David said. "And I can't thank you enough." "Don't thank me, just—" Bob looked past David toward the living room. "Just don't leave her alone again. She's good people. Best kind. Deserves better than being forgotten." The words stung because they were true. "I won't. I promise I won't." Bob nodded, satisfied. "Good. 'Cause the neighborhood's watching now. We take care of our own around here." He started to leave, then turned back. "And son, welcome back. Your mother used to talk about you when you were younger. The boy who helped neighbors with yard work, who shoveled Mrs. Patterson's walk every winter, who tutored kids at the library. That's the David she raised. Maybe it's time to remember him." David stood in the doorway long after Bob left, processing the weight of those words. He'd forgotten that David. The kid who understood community, who knew his neighbors' names, who showed up when people needed help. When had he become the man who was too busy for his own mother? That night, as David and Margaret ate dinner together, a real dinner, with fresh vegetables and proper portions, she asked, "What are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking about who I used to be. Before the company, before the money, before I convinced myself that success meant a penthouse and a sports car. And who were you?" "I was your son." David set down his fork. "I was part of this neighborhood, part of something bigger than myself. I had purpose beyond profit margins." Margaret reached across the small table, taking his hand. "You can be that person again. It's not too late." "How do I start?" "You already have." She squeezed his hand. "You came home. You saw what you'd missed. You're here, at this table, eating this meal. That's the first step." They finished dinner in thoughtful silence. After washing dishes, David walked out to the front porch. The evening air was cool, carrying the smell of someone grilling nearby. Kids were playing basketball down the street, their laughter echoing off houses. Claire was getting her mail. She waved. Bob drove by in his old truck, honking. The Martinez family walked past, the daughter Claire had mentioned earlier, stopping to chat with Margaret through the screen door. This was community. This was connection. This was what he'd traded for marble floors and city views. And standing there on his mother's porch, watching the simple beauty of people living life together, David understood something profound. He hadn't been climbing towards success in Manhattan. He'd been falling away from everything that mattered. But he'd hit bottom just in time, and now, finally, he could start climbing back up, toward his mother, toward his community, toward his humanity, toward home. 3 days later, David sat in his mother's small dining area, now furnished with a proper table and chairs he'd ordered, laptop open, video conference software running. His business partners' faces filled the screen. Marcus, his CFO, and Jennifer, his COO. "David, we need you back in New York." Marcus's voice carried frustration through the speakers. "The Henderson deal is falling apart. They want to meet the CEO in person, not through a screen." David glanced toward the kitchen where Margaret was making tea, moving carefully, her breathing still labored from the simplest tasks. "Then reschedule for video," David said calmly. "Or they can come here." "Come to Ohio." Jennifer's eyebrows shot up. "David, these are investors who flew in from Dubai. You're asking them to come to a small town?" "I'm not asking them anything. I'm stating my availability." David kept his voice level. "If the deal requires me to abandon my mother 3 days after discovering she was selling furniture to eat, then it's not a deal worth making." Silence on the other end. Marcus and Jennifer exchanged glances. "Look," Marcus said carefully, "we understand you're going through something. We get it. But you built this company. You can't just walk away because my mother almost died while I was too busy to notice." David's voice hardened. "Because I found her begging for food from neighbors. Which part of that seems unimportant to you, Marcus?" "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" David leaned toward the camera. "Because from here, it sounds like you're saying business matters more than family." Jennifer spoke up, her tone softer. "David, no one's saying that. We're worried about you. This is a huge change. You're talking about running a multi-million-dollar company from your childhood bedroom. I'm running it from a home office. The location doesn't matter in the digital age. You've said that yourself 100 times when pitching remote work solutions to clients. That's different." "How? How is it different?" David challenged. "Either remote work functions or it doesn't. Either you trust me to lead from anywhere or you don't." More uncomfortable silence. "The shareholders won't like this," Marcus finally said. "The shareholders voted me in because I make good decisions. This is a good decision." "Is it, though?" Jennifer asked. "Or is it guilt making choices for you?" The question hit hard because it had truth in it. David sat back, considering his answer carefully. Margaret appeared in the doorway holding 2 cups of tea. She must have heard the conversation. Their eyes met, and she gave him a small, encouraging nod. "Maybe it started as guilt," David admitted. But it's not anymore. I'm seeing clearly for the first time in years. I built a company while forgetting why I wanted success in the first place. I wanted to give my mother a better life. Instead, I gave her money and took away myself. That's not success. That's failure with a nice paycheck. David, Marcus began. I'm not abandoning the company, David interrupted. I'm rebalancing my life. And honestly, if the business can't survive without me being physically present in Manhattan, then we've built it wrong. We've preached flexibility and innovation to every client. Time to practice what we sell. He saw Margaret smile from the doorway. I'm staying here, David continued firmly. I'll work remotely. I'll fly in for critical meetings if absolutely necessary. But my home is here now. If that's a problem, we can discuss other arrangements. But I'm not negotiating on this. The silence that followed was different, resigned, accepting. All right, Jennifer said finally. We'll make it work. But David, don't lose yourself in the opposite extreme either. Finding balance means not neglecting everything you built. I won't. I promise. He meant it. Now what's actually happening with Henderson? They spent the next hour working through business issues. David found he could focus just as well from here, maybe better, without the constant interruptions of office drop-ins and the pressure to attend every networking event. When the call ended, Margaret brought over his tea, now lukewarm. That sounded tense. It was necessary. David closed his laptop. They needed to understand this isn't temporary. I'm not coming back. Ish. And if the company suffers, then maybe it deserves to. He took the tea. What's the point of building an empire if it requires me to lose my humanity? Margaret sat across from him, studying his face. You've changed. I'm trying to. No. She shook her head. You're not trying. You're doing it, and I'm proud of you. The words warmed him more than any business success ever had. That afternoon, David was organizing the new furniture delivery when he heard a crash from the kitchen. His mother's teacup lay shattered on the floor. Margaret stood frozen, one hand pressed to her chest, face drained of color. Mom? She tried to speak but couldn't, just gasped for air, eyes wide with fear. David's phone was in his hand before conscious thought. 911, what's your emergency? My mother, heart patient, she can't breathe. He rattled off the address while moving to support Margaret's weight as her knees buckled. Stay with me, Mom. Stay with me. Ambulance is coming. Her lips moved. No sound came out. The next 10 minutes were the longest of David's life. He held his mother on the kitchen floor, feeling how fragile she was, how close to breaking. Her pulse raced under his fingers, too fast, too irregular. Don't leave me, he whispered. Please, Mom. I just got here. I just started to make this right. Don't leave me. Sirens wailed closer. Voices shouted. Paramedics rushed in. David had left the front door open. Cardiac arrhythmia, one paramedic said, checking vitals. She's in V-TAC. We need to move now. They loaded Margaret onto a stretcher. David climbed into the ambulance, holding her hand, watching monitors flash numbers he didn't understand, but knew were bad. At the hospital, they wheeled her straight into the ER. A nurse, young, efficient, stopped David at the door. You need to wait here, sir. We'll update you as soon as possible. But she's getting the best care, I promise. But you can't be in there right now. The doors swung shut. David stood in the sterile hallway, his mother's blood on his shirt from where he'd held her, his hands still shaking. He'd been back 3 days, and already he was losing her. His phone rang. Marcus. David almost didn't answer, then did out of habit. Now's not a good time. David. Henderson pulled out. They won't work with a CEO who's not fully committed to being present. I'm sorry, but we're talking about a $12 million deal, and David hung up. The phone rang again. He turned it off. $12 million. 3 days ago, that number would have devastated him, would have sent him into panic mode, making calls, offering concessions, flying anywhere to save the deal. Now he just sank into a plastic waiting room chair and put his head in his hands, wondering if his mother was going to survive the next hour. Perspective was a harsh teacher. Footsteps approached. David looked up to see Claire rushing down the hall, still in her work scrubs. "I heard the ambulance," she said, slightly breathless. "Is she—" "They're working on her. Some kind of heart thing. VTech, they called it." Claire sat beside him, her nursing experience showing in the way her face tightened with worry. "That's serious. But if they caught it in time, she'll be okay. What if they didn't? Then worrying won't change anything." She put a hand on his shoulder. "All you can do is be here, which you are. That matters, David." Others started arriving. Bob from the hardware store, holding his baseball cap awkwardly. The Martinez family, daughter looking worried. Neighbors David barely knew, but who clearly knew and loved his mother. They filled the waiting room with quiet concern. No one spoke much. They just waited, together. An hour passed, then 2. A doctor finally emerged. Older woman, grey hair, tired eyes that had seen too many emergencies. "Family of Margaret Monroe?" David shot to his feet. "I'm her son." "She's stable. We got the rhythm under control, but it was close." The doctor gestured for him to sit. "Her heart is severely compromised. The arrhythmia indicates significant damage, likely from months of stress, poor nutrition, and missing medications." Each word was an accusation. "She needs intensive care," the doctor continued. "Proper medication management, strict diet, regular monitoring. Most importantly," she looked directly at David, "she needs less stress, peace, support. She's been fighting alone for too long." "She won't be alone anymore," David said, voice hoarse. "I'm here now." "Good, because next time we might not catch it." The doctor softened slightly. "She can have visitors in about an hour. 1 at a time. 5 minutes each." She left. David sat back down, overwhelmed. Bob spoke up. "We'll wait, if that's all right. Want to see her when we can." David looked around at these neighbors, these near strangers who cared more about his mother than he'd shown in years. "Thank you," he managed. "All of you, for everything. We're family here," Bob said simply. "That's what family does." When David finally got to see his mother, she looked small in the hospital bed. Tubes and wires connected her to machines that beeped steadily, but her eyes were open. "Mom, I ruined your day." Her voice was weak but trying for humor. "Don't." David pulled the chair close, taking her hand carefully around the IV. "Don't joke about this. You scared me. I scared myself." She closed her eyes briefly. "Thought this was it. Thought I was leaving you right after you came back. You're not going anywhere. Doctor says you'll be fine with proper care." "Proper care means money, David. Hospital bills." "Stop." He squeezed her hand gently. "I don't care about money. I have plenty of money. You know what I don't have plenty of? Time with you. So you're going to accept whatever treatment you need, and you're going to let me pay for it, and you're not going to feel guilty about it." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "I lost you a deal today, didn't I? I heard your phone ring earlier. How did you—" "Mother's intuition, even while coding." A weak smile. "What did you lose?" $12 million. Her face crumpled. "Oh, David." "I don't care." And he meant it completely. "They wanted me to choose between business and you. That's not even a choice. You win, every time, forever. But your company will survive or won't. Either way, I'm here, with you." He leaned closer. "I spent 6 years building wealth and losing what mattered. I'm not making that mistake again. You hear me, Mom? I'm not leaving. Not for 12 million, not for 100 million. Not for anything." She cried quietly. David stayed holding her hand until a nurse came to end visiting hours. In the waiting room, the neighbors were still there. "She okay?" Bob asked. "She will be." They nodded, satisfied, and began leaving in small groups. Claire hung back. "That was a big deal you lost, wasn't it?" she asked quietly. "How did you—" "Hospital walls are thin, and you weren't exactly quiet on that call." She smiled sadly. "Was it worth it?" David looked toward the hallway leading to his mother's room, thought about 6 years of chasing money, thought about finding her on a doorstep with an empty bowl, thought about her gasping for air on the kitchen floor. "Every penny," he said. Claire nodded. "Then you're learning what the rest of us already knew," Some things matter more than dollars. That night, David returned to the empty house, walked through rooms that now had furniture but still felt hollow without his mother's presence. He opened his laptop. Emails flooded in, angry messages from Marcus, confused questions from Jennifer, partnership offers rescinded, opportunities vanishing. He read them all with detached calm. Then he composed one message and sent it to his entire company. I'm taking a leave of absence to care for my mother. Marcus and Jennifer have full authority to act in my stead. I'll be available for critical decisions, but I won't be returning to New York for the foreseeable future. If that's unacceptable to shareholders, I'll step down as CEO rather than abandon my family again. This is non-negotiable. He hit send and closed the laptop. Tomorrow he'd deal with fallout. Tomorrow he'd face consequences. Tonight, he'd sit in his mother's house and be grateful she was alive to come home to, because he'd finally learned the hardest lesson. Success without meaning is just expensive emptiness, and all the money in the world can't buy back time you've lost. But if you're lucky, if you're given a second chance, you can choose differently. David was choosing. Finally, truly. And whatever came next, he'd face it not as a CEO protecting profits, but as a son protecting what actually mattered. 3 months later, David stood at the kitchen counter chopping vegetables for dinner while his mother sat at the table reviewing fabric samples for her newest project. Sunlight streamed through the new windows, catching dust motes in its golden rays. The house had been transformed, not into something lavish, Margaret wouldn't allow that, but into something warm, functional, and safe. New appliances hummed efficiently. Fresh paint brightened every room, the water heater worked, the roof no longer leaked. But the real transformation wasn't in the house. It was in the people living in it. You're getting good at that, Margaret observed, watching him dice tomatoes with surprising skill. YouTube tutorials. David grinned. Who knew the internet had uses beyond business deals? She laughed, a sound he'd heard more in the past 3 months than the previous 3 years. Her color had returned. The weight she'd lost was slowly coming back. Most importantly, the fear that had haunted her eyes was gone. David's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then returned to cooking. You're not going to check that? Margaret asked, surprised. It's Saturday, family time. They know not to call unless the building's on fire. And is it? Marcus would have called twice. David scraped vegetables into the pan, the sizzle filling the kitchen with savory smells. It can wait until Monday. This simple moment, cooking together, talking about nothing important, existing in shared space, would have been impossible 3 months ago. David would have been on his phone, half present, already thinking about the next meeting, the next deal, the next conquest. Now he was fully here, and nowhere else. The doorbell rang. Through the window, David saw Bob's familiar truck in the driveway. I'll get it. Margaret started to rise. Sit, Mum. I got it. He opened the door to find not just Bob but half the neighborhood, Claire with a casserole dish, the Martinez family with fresh tamales, Linda from the library with a cake, others gathered on the lawn, carrying food, folding chairs, decorations. What's all this? David asked, bewildered. Surprise, Claire beamed. We're throwing Margaret a celebration. 3 months healthy. That deserves recognition. You all didn't have to. Oh, hush. Linda pushed past him with the cake. We wanted to. That's what matters. Within 30 minutes, the backyard was transformed. String lights hung from the old oak tree. Tables borrowed from the community center held enough food for an army. Kids ran around playing tag. Adults clustered in conversation groups, laughing and sharing stories. Margaret stood in the middle of it all, tears streaming down her face, but smiling so wide it looked like her face might break. This is too much, she kept saying. This is just enough, Bob corrected, giving her a careful hug. You gave to this neighborhood for 20 years. Let us give back for one afternoon. David watched from the porch, throat tight with emotion. 3 months ago, he'd been a stranger to this community. Now children called him by name. Neighbors waved when he jogged past. He was part of something bigger than himself again. Claire appeared beside him, handing him a beer. "You did good, you know. I just showed up. Finally. That's harder than it sounds." She clinked her bottle against his. "Most people never figure out what actually matters. They spend their whole lives chasing shadows, thinking success looks like corner offices and expensive cars. I was one of those people. Was." She emphasized the word. Past tense. That's the important part. They stood in comfortable silence, watching Margaret laugh with the Martinez family, her face glowing with genuine joy. "Can I tell you something?" Claire said quietly. "The day you found her on my porch, I was afraid." "Of what?" "That you'd throw money at the problem and leave, buy her a house, hire a nurse, consider your duty done." She turned to him. "Rich kids do that. Ease their guilt with checks and distance. You thought I'd do that. I did, but you proved me wrong." Her voice softened. "You stayed, even when it cost you, especially when it cost you." David thought about the Henderson deal, the partnerships that dissolved when he refused to return to New York, the investors who pulled out, uncomfortable with a CEO who prioritized family over profit margins. His company had survived. Marcus and Jennifer were more capable than he'd given them credit for, but it was smaller now, leaner, more focused. And David didn't regret a single lost dollar. "My business partners thought I was crazy," he admitted. "Said I was throwing away everything I'd built." "Were you?" "No." The answer came without hesitation. "I was finding what I'd lost." A commotion drew their attention. Margaret was opening gifts. Small, heartfelt things, hand-knitted scarves, homemade jam, a photo album filled with pictures of neighborhood gatherings she'd been part of over the years. She opened the last box and gasped. Inside was a quilt, intricate, beautiful, made from fabric scraps she recognized, pieces from dresses she'd sewn for neighbors' daughters, uniforms she'd repaired, curtains she'd helped choose. "We all contributed a piece," Linda explained. "Everything you've ever touched in this neighborhood is in that quilt, so when you wrap yourself in it, you'll remember, you're never alone. You're woven into all of us." Margaret broke down completely. Not sad tears, overwhelming gratitude tears. David moved to her side, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Thank you," she managed through sobs. "All of you. For seeing me. For being there when I needed you, for showing me what community really means." "You showed us first," Bob said gruffly. "We just learned from the best." The party continued into the evening. David found himself in a corner of the yard with a group of men his age, neighbors he'd grown up with and then forgotten. "So you really left New York?" one asked. "Like permanently?" "Permanently. Don't you miss it? The excitement, the opportunities?" David considered the questions seriously. "Sometimes I miss the energy, that feeling of being in the center of everything." He looked toward his mother, laughing with Claire over some shared joke. "But I was in the center of everything except what mattered. Now I'm exactly where I need to be." "What about your career?" "It's fine. I work remotely. Turns out most of what I did in a Manhattan office can be done from anywhere with good Wi-Fi." He smiled. "And the things that actually required presence, they weren't business meetings. They were moments like this." Later, as the party wound down and neighbors began trickling home, David helped clean up. Margaret had finally sat down, exhausted but happy, wrapped in her new quilt. Claire was packing up leftover food when she paused, looking at David thoughtfully. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Sure." "Do you ever regret it? The money you lost? The deals that fell through? The life you gave up?" David didn't answer immediately. He finished stacking chairs, then sat on the porch steps, looking at the quiet street. "I used to measure success by numbers," he said finally. "Net worth, company valuation, deal sizes. The bigger the number, the more successful I thought I was." He turned to Claire. "You know what I realized? Those numbers mean nothing if you're alone when you celebrate them. And now I measure success differently." He gestured toward the yard, still decorated with string lights. Did I make someone smile today? Did I help carry someone's burden? Did I show up when it mattered? Those are the metrics that actually count. Claire sat beside him. That's very philosophical for a former Wall Street type. I prefer enlightened. He grinned, then sobered. But honestly, I almost learned this lesson too late. If I'd waited another month, another week, Mom might not have made it. And I'd have spent the rest of my life with more money than I could spend and a hole nothing could fill. But you didn't wait. No. And every day I'm grateful for whatever grace gave me that moment of clarity. He looked at his mother through the window, dozing in her chair, quilt wrapped around her. She saved my life by almost losing hers. They sat in comfortable silence as evening deepened into night. You know what the neighborhood says about you? Claire asked. Probably that I'm the idiot who abandoned his mother? No. She shook her head. They say you're the man who found his way home. That's rare, David. Most people get lost and stay lost. You found your way back. Inside, Margaret stirred awake, saw David on the porch and waved, smiling. He waved back, heart full in a way no business success had ever achieved. I'm not special, David said quietly. I just finally understood what my mother tried to teach me all along. Life isn't about what you accumulate. It's about who you love and who loves you back. Everything else is just noise. Claire stood, stretching. Well, for what it's worth, you're doing it right now, and that matters. She left, joining the last few neighbors heading home. David went inside. Margaret was folding the quilt carefully, fingers tracing the fabric pieces with wonder. What are you thinking? David asked. I'm thinking, if someone had told me 4 months ago that I'd be here, healthy, happy, surrounded by love, I wouldn't have believed them. She looked up at him. And if they'd told me you'd be here, truly here, not just visiting but living, I'd have thought it was impossible. It almost was, but it wasn't. She stood carefully, walking to him. You came back, not just to this town, not just to this house. You came back to yourself, to who you really are. Who am I? She smiled, touching his face. You're my son, my beautiful, kind, present son, not the CEO, not the millionaire, just you. And that's more than enough. David hugged her, careful of her still healing heart. I love you, Mom. I love you too, baby. Always have, always will. They stood in the warm kitchen, holding each other, while outside the string lights swayed in the breeze, and the neighborhood settled into peaceful sleep. 3 months ago, David Monroe had been a successful businessman who'd forgotten the cost of his success. Today, he was a son who'd found his way home. Tomorrow, he'd wake up in this small house, make coffee for his mother, work from his home office, and live a life that wouldn't impress anyone on Wall Street, but it would mean everything to the one person who mattered most. And in the end, that was the only success worth achieving. Not the life that looked impressive, but the life that felt meaningful. Not the accomplishments you could frame on a wall, but the relationships you could hold in your heart. David had learned what takes some people a lifetime to understand. If they ever do, you can conquer the entire world and still lose yourself in the process. But the journey back, to family, to community, to love, that's where true victory lies. Success isn't measured by what you gain. It's measured by what you refuse to lose. And the only wealth that matters is the love you give and receive when all the money is gone and all the deals are done. Because in the end, we're not remembered for our bank accounts or our business empires. We're remembered for how we showed up, how we loved, how we made others feel valued and seen. That's the legacy worth building. That's the success worth achieving. That's the life worth living. David had almost missed it, but he didn't. And that made all the difference.